Welcome to this explainer. We throw around the terms millennial and Gen Z all the time, right? But today we're taking a deep, data-driven look at how these two generations actually differ, and more importantly, why. We're going to push past the buzzwords and let the numbers paint the real picture.
But hey, before we dive into the research, take a quick second and think about your own quirks and habits. Do they actually match up with your birth year? It's super easy to just slap a label on someone, but as we go through this data, keep your own day-to-day life in mind.
To make sense of it all, we're breaking this data down into four main themes. Number 1, meet the generations. 2, the great tech divide. 3, work, school, and independence. And finally, number 4, shopping, optimism, and values.
Okay, Section 1. Meet the generations, defining millennials and Gen Z. Let's establish our baseline and figure out exactly who we're talking about here.
This timeline is going to anchor us perfectly. So millennials were born starting in 1980, wrapping up right around the mid-1990s, and then Generation Z follows directly after that, stretching from the mid-90s up until the mid-2000s. They sit right next to each other on the generational ladder, but man, as we'll see, their life experiences are just worlds apart.
Let's kick things off with millennials. You might have heard them called echo boomers. Why is that? Well, this generation represents a totally massive, undeniable spike in the global population. This huge surge in birth rates throughout the 80s and 90s basically acted as an echo to the original post-war baby boomers.
And that brings us to Gen Z, often called the I generation, which makes total sense. Unlike millennials, Gen Z was born into an entirely digital, constantly connected world. Think about it. They have literally never known a society without widespread internet access. That fundamental difference, it changes absolutely everything about how they process the world around them.
Which leads us perfectly into Section 2, the great tech divide, adapting to the web versus being born into it. Let's look at the massive gap in how these groups handle technology.
You see, millennials are digital pioneers. They actually witnessed the birth of smartphones and instant messaging, and they watched internet access explode from just 14% up to 87%. Generation Z, on the other hand, has been entirely immersed in tech from day one. Because they grew up with this constant, unending stream of updates, they actually process digital information faster than any other age group out there.
Because of this deep immersion, a full 18% of Gen Z believes 13 is a perfectly acceptable age to own a smartphone. Now compare that to millennials and older generations, where only 4% agree with that. To Gen Z, a smartphone isn't some fancy luxury. It is practically a baseline tool for human existence.
And when it comes to staying connected, get a load of this wild statistic. Nearly half of Gen Z, 40% to be exact, prioritizes a reliable Wi-Fi connection over reliable indoor plumbing. I know, it sounds crazy, but it absolutely highlights just how vital being digitally connected is to their daily lives.
Now, while their constant use of quick-hit apps like Snapchat might chip away at their overall attention spans, Gen Z completely outpaces millennials when it comes to multitasking. We're talking head-spinning levels here. They can easily knock out a school assignment on a laptop, research something else on a tablet, watch TV, and chat on their phone, all at the exact same time. It's honestly incredible.
But there's a flip side. This high-speed processing means Gen Z has basically zero tolerance for glitchy websites. If an online store isn't loading instantly, they are gone, immediately looking elsewhere to get the job done. Millennials, though, well, we remember the agonizing, screeching days of dial-up internet, so we're generally a bit more patient and willing to give a lagging site a second chance.
All right, moving on to Section 3, work, school, and independence, the future of the office and education. Let's see how these tech habits shape real-world professional behaviors.
If you want it done right, then do it yourself. According to the data, a whopping 71% of Generation Z lives by this exact motto. It really showcases this fiercely competitive and highly independent mindset that drives how they tackle projects and everyday challenges.
So, how does this actually translate to the office? Well, while millennials usually thrive in collaborative, open office environments and love teaming up on projects, Gen Z is a totally different story. A massive 69% of them heavily prefer having their own isolated workspace so they can just put their heads down and get things done independently.
But here is a fascinating paradox. Despite being true digital natives, an overwhelming 74% of Gen Z actually prefers face-to-face communication in the workplace over digital tools.
While millennials were the ones championing digital chat for business, Gen Z actually craves a more personal approach at work. They're striking a really unique balance between the online and offline worlds.
And when it comes to education, Gen Z has the distinct benefit of hindsight. Because of this, 75% of them are seeking alternative education routes instead of just blindly following the traditional college path that was so heavily pushed onto millennials.
This skepticism isn't just a phase, it's entirely data-driven. They've watched millennials take on massive mountains of student debt, only to end up in a really tough job market. In fact, 44% of recent college grads are working in jobs that didn't even require those expensive degrees in the first place. Gen Z is simply looking at the math and deciding to explore other options.
Finally, we arrive at Section 4, Shopping, Optimism, and Values. How they see the world and spend their money. Let's dive into their consumer habits and their surprisingly optimistic view of the future.
Gen Z demands incredibly fast, tech-driven convenience. We're talking one-hour delivery and in-store interactive kiosks. They value that way more than traditional brand loyalty, and they won't hesitate to switch retailers if the service is better. Plus, they view shopping as a highly social thing, and they're actually twice as likely as millennials to deeply consult YouTube reviews before dropping any cash.
For Gen Z, social influencers are the modern-day celebrities. They're way more likely to be browsing YouTube than sitting in a traditional movie theater. Actually, 63% of them say they prefer seeing real people and social influencers in their ads, completely steering clear of the polished, traditional celebrity endorsements that used to work so well on millennials.
Now here's the twist. Despite their total lack of brand loyalty and their extremely high demands for retail convenience, Gen Z is remarkably more optimistic about the country's direction than millennials are. Exactly half, 50% of Generation Z says the country is heading in the right direction, compared to just 42% of millennials.
This optimism, it clearly stems from getting a head start. A staggering 64% of Gen Z starts researching or at least talking about their financial futures by the age of 13. 13! And the payoff is absolutely huge. 95% of those early planners report feeling highly optimistic about their future in general. They're taking control early, and it's giving them some serious peace of mind.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a quick question to ponder. Does your everyday behavior actually match up with the data for your generation? Are your work habits, your tech tolerance, and your financial planning perfectly in line with the stats for your birth year? Or are you completely breaking the generational mold? It's always fascinating to see what the numbers say, but it's even more fascinating to see how we actually live it out. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive into the data.